A crisp autumn wind howled through the streets of Washington, D.C., as a lone figure trudged forward. Her military boots were scuffed, her uniform faded, and her backpack hung loosely on her shoulders. Every step carried exhaustion, yet her posture remained strong. At the White House gates, security guards tensed as she approached. "Ma'am, can I help you?" one asked. She locked eyes with him, her blue gaze unwavering. "I need to see the president." "Do you have an appointment?" She shook her head. "Number, but I've walked across this country for months to be here. He needs to hear my story." The guard hesitated before stepping inside. Something about her told him. This was no ordinary soldier. Inside the White House, the security team debated. A lone soldier arriving without notice was unusual, but something about her composure unsettled them. "She claims she's walked across the country to speak with President Trump," the guard reported. "Sounds like a stunt," another officer muttered. Yet when they pulled up records, they saw her name, Sergeant Emily Luna, U.S. Army, honorable discharge. Moments later, an aide stepped forward. "I'll let the president know," he said, intrigued. Outside, Emily stood motionless, her hands gripping the straps of her backpack. She had come too far to be turned away now. In the Oval Office, President Trump listened intently as his aide explained the situation. "A female soldier walked across the country. Why?" he asked, setting down his coffee. "She refuses to say, unless she tells you personally, sir." Trump leaned back in his chair, considering. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to reach him with a grand gesture, but something about this felt different. "Bring her in," he said finally. "Let's hear what she has to say." Moments later, Emily Luna was escorted inside, standing face to face with the most powerful man in the country. Emily stood at attention, her posture stiff despite the exhaustion in her muscles. "Sergeant Luna," Trump said, studying her, "you walked across the country to see me?" "Yes, sir," she replied. "Why?" She exhaled, steadying herself. "Because there's something America needs to hear, something I lived through." Trump motioned for her to sit. "You have my attention." Emily hesitated, glancing at the portraits of past presidents lining the walls. Then she took a deep breath and began. "My journey started with a promise, and that promise led me here." The room fell silent as she started her story. "I grew up in a small town in Texas," Emily began. "My brother James and I were inseparable. He was my hero." She paused, memories flashing in her mind. "We both enlisted after high school. He went into the Marines. I joined the Army. We promised each other, no matter what happened, we'd always come home." Trump listened, nodding. "But war doesn't care about promises," she continued, her voice tightening. "In Afghanistan, my brother never made it home." She swallowed hard. "I walked across the country because I needed to honor him, and to tell you what happened next." Emily pulled out an old, crumpled letter from her backpack. "This was from James," she said, her voice softer now. "It arrived after he died. His last words to me." Trump reached out, carefully taking the letter. "My sister," he read aloud. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it. But don't cry for me. I lived with purpose. Now it's your turn. Tell my story. Make people listen." Emily wiped away a tear. "That's why I walked across America. Not for me, but for him, and every soldier like him." The room grew heavy with silence. Emily clenched her fists. There are so many soldiers like James, heroes who are forgotten after they fall. Their families suffer in silence. Their sacrifices fade from memory. She looked Trump in the eye. "Mr. President, I couldn't let that happen." Trump sat forward. "So you walked across the country to make sure they're remembered?" "Yes," she said. "At every town, I told their stories. I met families grieving alone. I walked so they wouldn't be invisible." Trump nodded slowly. "You're saying America needs to do better?" "Yes, sir," Emily said firmly. "And I believe you can help." Trump rubbed his chin. "You've carried their stories on your back, step by step." Emily nodded. "Each name I carried was a life that mattered. Some people thanked me. Others ignored me. But I never stopped." Trump tapped his desk. "Do you have a list of their names?" Emily unzipped her bag, pulling out a notebook filled with names, handwritten one by one. She slid it across the desk. "This is them." Trump flipped through the pages, absorbing the weight of it all. "This isn't just a story," he murmured. "This is a movement." Trump carefully flipped through the notebook, scanning the handwritten names. "How many?" he asked. "Over 1,000, Emily said. "Every name belongs to someone who gave their life for this country." Trump exhaled. "You carried their stories across America. That takes strength." Emily nodded. "But strength isn't enough. We need action." Trump looked at her. "What do you want me to do?" She met his gaze. "Give them the honor they deserve. Let the world hear their names." For the first time in a long while, Trump was speechless. Trump sat back, deep in thought. "You walked all this way to tell their stories. Now, you want me to help carry them forward." Emily nodded. "Yes, sir." He glanced at the list again. "We can make sure these names are never forgotten." His voice turned serious. "What if I bring you on stage at a national event? You tell America yourself?" Emily hesitated. "I didn't do this for attention." Trump shook his head. "This isn't about attention. It's about making sure people listen." Emily swallowed hard. "Then I'll do it. For them." The next day, rumors swirled. A mysterious soldier had walked across America and met with the president. The press demanded answers. At a briefing, a reporter asked, "Who is she?" Trump's press secretary smiled. "You'll find out soon." Meanwhile, Emily sat in a quiet White House room, mentally preparing. Soon the world would hear her story. A knock on the door. A White House aide entered. "Ma'am, you're scheduled to speak tomorrow. The whole country will be watching." Emily exhaled. She had walked thousands of miles. Now she just had to find the right words. The next day, Emily stood behind the podium at a nationally televised event, the president by her side. The crowd was silent, waiting. She gripped the microphone. "My name is Sergeant Emily Luna. I walked across this country to tell you about my brother James, and the countless others like him." The audience leaned in as she continued. "They died for us, but too many of them have been forgotten. That must change." Trump stepped forward, and it will change. Starting today, we honor these heroes in a way that lasts forever. The crowd erupted in applause. After the speech, Trump turned to Emily. "I have an idea." She listened as he explained. "A new national monument. One that includes the names of every fallen soldier from the past 20 years. A place where families can come, where people can remember." Emily felt her throat tighten. "You'd really do that?" Trump nodded. "This country needs to see their names." Tears welled in her eyes. "That's all I ever wanted." He extended a hand. "Then let's make it happen." She shook it, realizing her long journey had led to something greater than she'd imagined. The nation exploded with support. News outlets covered Emily's story, and thousands of families wrote in, sharing their own losses. One mother, whose son had died in combat, wrote, "For the first time, I feel like someone is listening." Emily read every letter, overwhelmed by the impact. Meanwhile, the government fast-tracked the plans for the new memorial. Trump called Emily into his office. "You're coming with me to oversee the project." She blinked in surprise. "Me?" Trump smiled. "Who else? This was your mission. Let's finish it together." A month later, Emily stood beside Trump at the groundbreaking ceremony for the new National Heroes Memorial. Shovels hit the dirt as cameras flashed. Families of fallen soldiers watched, some in tears. Emily whispered to herself, "James, we did it." After the ceremony, Trump turned to her. "I know you didn't do this for recognition, but people want to thank you." Emily shook her head. "I only did what was right." Trump smiled. "That's what makes you a true leader." For the first time in a long while, Emily felt at peace. With the memorial underway, Emily's work wasn't finished. Veterans across the country reached out, asking for help. One letter caught her eye. "I'm a veteran struggling with PTSD. You inspired me. Please don't stop now." She showed it to Trump. "I walked across the country to share their stories," she said. "But what about the soldiers still with us?" Trump nodded. "Then let's do more." Together they launched a new initiative for veteran support, mental health care, and housing assistance. Emily realized her journey wasn't over. It had just begun. Months later, Emily returned to Texas, where it all began. Her town welcomed her like a hero, but she still felt like the same girl who once made a promise to her brother. She visited his grave, kneeling beside the stone. "We did it, James," she whispered. "People are listening now." A soft breeze rustled the trees, and she felt his presence. As she stood, she knew. Her journey wasn't just about honoring the fallen. It was about helping the living. And she wouldn't stop until every soldier knew they weren't alone. Back at the White House, Trump handed Emily a small framed letter. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It was James's last letter, preserved forever in the new National Heroes Memorial. She traced the ink with her fingers, her chest tightening. "Thank you," she whispered. Trump nodded. "This country owes you more than thanks." Emily smiled, holding the frame close. For the first time, she felt like her brother's last wish had truly come true. The National Heroes Memorial was finally complete. At the grand opening, Emily stood before a sea of people. Among them were thousands of military families. She took a deep breath. "This memorial is for them," she said, "and for every soldier who gave everything. We will never forget." The crowd cheered, some wiping away tears. Trump approached her. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Emily turned to him, determination in her eyes. "Always." Months later, Emily received an unexpected letter. It was an official government invitation to lead a new veterans initiative. Her journey, which had started with one promise, had now turned into a lifelong mission. As she signed her name on the acceptance letter, she smiled. James's voice echoed in her heart. "Now it's your turn." She had walked across the country to honor her brother. Now she would dedicate her life to serving those who still needed her. And America would never forget.